The grand chamber of the High Synod was not designed for silence, yet silence was the only thing that filled it now, a suffocating, gelatinous weight that pressed against the sensory frills of the assembled delegates. This was the Hall of Eternal Resonance, a structure grown from living crystal deep beneath the crust of the capital world, designed to amplify the slightest whisper of agreement into a harmonious chord of governance. But today the crystal was dull, gray, and utterly mute. High Exarch Thulren sat upon the dais of light, his four chitinous arms resting heavily on the obsidian control sphere, his compound eyes dim with a fatigue that transcended mere biology. Around him, the tiered rows of the Synod stretched upward into the gloom, occupied by the representatives of 1,000 systems, yet the air tasted of copper and ozone, the scent of terror. They were waiting for death, or perhaps they were waiting for salvation, and the terrifying ambiguity of the choice was what kept their mandibles locked tight and their breathing spiracles fluttering in irregular, panicked rhythms. The threat was not theoretical. It was visible on the massive holographic projection that dominated the center of the chamber, a swirling, inky darkness that was slowly devouring the star charts of the eastern fringe. The Void Hunters, a species of synthetic organic horrors that did not communicate, did not negotiate, and did not stop, had breached the final containment line at the Antares gate. Thulren shifted his weight, the sound of his carapace scraping against the throne echoing like a gunshot in the stillness, causing a dozen junior scribes to flinch visibly. He looked down at the small, trembling figure standing in the center of the prosecution circle. It was Ambassador Kalen of the Outer Rim Protectorate, a bipedal, soft-skinned avian analog whose plumage was currently dull and molting from extreme stress. Kalen was the foreigner in question, the one who had broken the supreme edict of the Synod, the one who had looked into the abyss of the uncharted galactic north and screamed for help. Kalen had not just violated protocol. He had committed a heresy so profound that in earlier eras, his entire genetic line would have been purged from the records. He had sent a distress signal into the dead zone, the region of space where the stars were too bright, the gravity too heavy, and the radiation storms too violent for civilized life to endure. He had called out to the Deathworlders, the humans. "You understand what you have done, Ambassador," Thulren said, his voice a low grind of tectonic plates amplified by the dying acoustics of the hall. "You have traded a certain death for an uncertain apocalypse. The Void Hunters seek to consume our biomass, yes. It is a tragedy, but the things you have summoned, they do not consume, they burn, they break. They are the children of entropy." Kalen shivered, his small hands clutching the datapad to his chest as if it were a shield. "I had no choice, High Exarch," Kalen whispered, his voice trembling but strangely defiant, ringing clear through the oppressive atmosphere. "The Antares gate has fallen. The 7th Fleet is dust. The Void Hunters are processing the population of Gliss Prime as we speak. 3 billion souls. I listened to their screams for 3 cycles before the transmission cut. The Synod debated. The Synod composed treaties. The Synod did nothing. I could not stand in the silence any longer. I reached out to the only power capable of halting the tide." A murmur of dissent rippled through the upper tiers, a sound like dry leaves skittering over stone. A representative from the aquatic hegemony bubbled his displeasure through his translator collar. "You reached out to monsters," the aquatic voice gargled, distorted and harsh. "The Terrans are not a civilization. They are a quarantine breach waiting to happen. Their biology is a war against nature. Their planet is a Category 5 toxic hazard. Their ships. By the gods, Kalen, their ships are powered by the death of stars. You have invited a supernova into a library." Kalen raised his head, his black eyes glistening. "Then let the library burn if it saves the readers. We are dying. The logic of the Synod is the logic of the grave. We prioritize purity over survival. I begged for help because I wanted my children to live, even if they have to live in a universe shared with monsters." Thulren deactivated the holographic map, plunging the room into a twilight gloom, illuminated only by the bioluminescent moss lining the vaulted ceiling. "And did they answer?" the High Exarch asked, the question hanging in the air like a guillotine blade. "You sent the signal into the dark. Did the dark answer back?" Kalen swallowed hard. "They did. A single transmission, no video, no biometric data, just text. 4 words in the old trade tongue." The chamber held its collective breath. Even the aquatic representative ceased high. Bubbling. "What were the words?" Thulren demanded. Kalen looked up at the Exarch, his expression a mix of hope and absolute dread. "They said, 'Hold the line, coming.'" The simplicity of the message was more terrifying than a threat. It implied a casual relationship with catastrophe. It implied that the complete annihilation of a sector was merely a logistical hurdle. Before the debate could resume, before the High Exarch could issue the order for Kalen's arrest or execution, the sensor arrays embedded in the crystal walls began to scream. It was not the rhythmic alarm of a Void Hunter incursion. It was something else, a deep, resonant vibration that shook the very foundations of the planet. The delegates cried out, gripping their podiums as the floor heaved beneath them. The holographic display reignited automatically, overriding the Exarch's controls, flashing a crimson warning that no one in the chamber had ever seen before. Gravitational shear detected. Reality integrity compromised. Localized space-time fracture. "Is it the enemy?" someone screamed from the shadows. "Have they bypassed the planetary shields?" Thulren stared at the data scrolling frantically across his screen. "No," he whispered, his mandibles going slack. "The Void Hunters travel through subspace tunnels. This is a brute force entry. Something is tearing a hole in the universe to get here." The screen shifted to an orbital view. Above the capital world, the starfield was distorting. The light of the local sun bent and twisted, spiraling inward as if caught in a drain. A rupture opened in the fabric of space, not a clean blue wormhole used by civilized species, but a jagged, bleeding tear of red and violet energy, crackling with exotic particles that should not have existed outside of a black hole's accretion disk. From this wound in reality, a shape emerged. It was not elegant. It possessed none of the smooth curves and organic aesthetics favored by the Synod or even the crystalline geometries of the ancients. It was a block of brutalist anger, a massive slab of dark gray hull plating that seemed to absorb the starlight rather than reflect it. It was colossal, easily 3 times the mass of the Synod's largest dreadnought, covered in scars and pockmarks, bristling with antenna arrays and weapon emplacements that defied standard classification. But it was the rear of the ship that made the delegates recoil in primal horror. The vessel did not use ion drives or plasma thrusters. It was riding a continuous, controlled nuclear detonation, a plume of blue-white fire that trailed behind it for hundreds of kilometers, radiating enough hard radiation to sterilize a moon. The sheer violence of its propulsion was a declaration of war against physics itself. "Spirit of the Void," the aquatic delegate whispered, his translator struggling to convey the depth of his fear. "The radiation output. Their shields must be holding back the energy of a small sun just to keep the crew from melting." The ship stabilized in high orbit, its gravitational shadow causing tides to shift in the oceans below. A new signal washed over the planetary comms, overriding every channel, every frequency, every private link. It was not a request for docking. It was a statement of intent. The main screen in the chamber flickered and resolved into an image. The figure on the screen was bipedal, encased in a bulky, pressurized suit of matte black armor that looked as battle-worn as the ship. The helmet was removed, revealing a face that was terrifyingly exposed, pale, soft skin, patches of fibrous hair, and 2 forward-facing predator eyes that scanned the data streams with frightening intensity. The human. He looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a jagged scar ran down his left cheek, but his expression was one of supernatural calm. It was the calm of a creature that lived in the eye of a hurricane. Behind him, the bridge of the human ship was a hive of activity, but it was dark, lit only by amber warning lights and the glow of tactical displays. "This is High Admiral Vance of the United Terran Coalition ship Indomitable," the human said. His voice was deep, rough, like gravel tumbling in a mixer, translated instantly by the Synod's linguistic matrix. "We received a distress call from a designated foreigner entity codenamed Kalen. We have tracked the hostile fleet vector. We are intercepting." Thulren found his voice, though it felt small against the weight of the human's presence. "High Admiral," he projected, trying to maintain the dignity of his office. "I am High Exarch Thulren. We did not expect you to arrive so quickly or with such magnitude. The enemy force is vast. They are the Void Hunters. They are machines of infinite adaptation. Your vessel is singular. You cannot fight them alone." The human admiral blinked, a slow, deliberate motion. He looked at Thulren not with arrogance, but with a strange, pitying confusion. "Alone," Vance repeated. "Exarch, you misunderstand. We didn't bring a fleet because we don't need one. We brought the Indomitable, and we aren't here to fight a skirmish. We're here to close the door." Before Thulren could ask what that meant, the tactical display flared red. The Void Hunters had arrived. They dropped out of subspace on the far side of the system, a swarm of thousands of sleek biomechanical needles, moving with a hive-mind synchronization that was beautiful and terrifying. They ignored the planet. They ignored the orbital defense platforms. They turned as one entity toward the massive human ship that sat bleeding radiation into the void. The Void Hunters sensed a threat. They sensed a predator larger than themselves. In the great hall, the delegates watched in paralyzed silence. "They will be swarmed," Kalen whispered, his hope turning to ash. "There are too many. The Indomitable is large, yes, but it is a sluggish target. The hunters will strip it to the bone in minutes." On the screen, Admiral Vance did not flinch. He did not shout orders. He simply leaned forward and pressed a single key on his console. "Helm," Vance said, his voice transmitting clearly to the silent Synod chamber. "Unlock the main drive interlocks. Disengage safety protocols on the singularity containment. Let's show them why the dark is quiet." The human ship began to change. The massive armored plates along its flanks shifted and groaned, hydraulics hissing as they opened like the gills of a leviathan. But instead of missile batteries or laser arrays, the ship exposed massive, glowing coils of copper and tungsten, pulsing with a rhythmic, sickly violet light. The radiation alarms on the planet below spiked into the critical red zone, forcing the automated defense grids to raise planetary shields just to protect the atmosphere from the fallout of the human weapon charging up. It wasn't a laser. It wasn't plasma. It was gravity. The Indomitable surged forward, not away from the swarm, but directly into the heart of it. As it moved, the violet coils flared and space around the ship began to warp. The light of the distant stars smeared into streaks. The human ship created a localized gravity well, a mobile event horizon that dragged everything nearby toward it with the force of a collapsing star. The Void Hunter ships, agile and fast, tried to scatter, but physics was no longer on their side. They were caught in the shear. The Synod watched in horrified awe as thousands of enemy vessels were yanked violently off course, their hulls buckling, their engines screaming as they fought against a tide that should not exist. The Indomitable plowed through them like a wrecking ball through glass. Alien ships impacted against the human hull and simply disintegrated, their mass absorbed, their kinetic energy shrugged off by the shimmering, impossible density field the humans projected. "They are weaponizing mass," the aquatic delegate gurgled, his eyes wide. "They are using their ship as a gravity hammer. This is madness. If the containment fails, they will create a black hole that will swallow this entire system." Thulren watched the screen, unable to look away. "They know," he said softly. "Look at the Admiral. He knows the risk. He accepts it." On the bridge of the Indomitable, Vance watched the destruction with cold precision. "Shields holding at 40%, a crew member reported, her voice calm. "Hull integrity compromised on decks 7 through 10. Casualties reported in engineering. The main swarm is regrouping for a piercing run." Vance nodded. "Let them group up. It makes the math easier. Tactical, prepare the lance." The Void Hunters, realizing their kinetic attacks were useless against the gravity shield, coalesced into a single, massive spearhead formation. They intended to ram the human ship to overwhelm the field with sheer mass. It was a suicide tactic, one that had doomed a dozen civilizations before. They charged. The distance closed, 10,000 kilometers, 5,000, 2,000. The Synod delegates shielded their eyes, expecting the explosion. "Fire," Vance said. From the prow of the Indomitable, a beam of light erupted. It was not a coherent laser. It was a stream of relativistic matter, particles accelerated to 99.9% of the speed of light, guided by magnetic fields so powerful they could strip the iron from blood. The beam struck the center of the Void Hunter formation. There was no explosion because an explosion requires an atmosphere to carry the shockwave. Instead, there was erasure. The center of the enemy fleet simply ceased to exist. The matter was atomized instantly, turning into a cloud of superheated plasma that expanded outward at light speed, incinerating the ships on the periphery. The backlash of energy washed over the Indomitable, stripping away its external sensors, scorching the paint, turning the hull glowing red, but the ship held. It held because it was built by Deathworlders who viewed the laws of physics as suggestions rather than rules. Within seconds, the sky was clear. The Void Hunter fleet, the scourge of the eastern fringe, the end of worlds, was reduced to a drifting cloud of radioactive dust. The Indomitable sat in the center of the cloud, cooling slowly, its engines throbbing with a low, menacing rhythm. Silence returned to the grand chamber, but it was different now. It was not the silence of fear, it was the silence of religious awe. Kalen fell to his knees, weeping softly. Thulren stared at the screen at the human admiral who was now casually brushing dust off his console. "Ambassador Kalen," Thulren said, his voice trembling. "You were right. They are monsters." He paused, watching the human ship vent excess heat into the void. "But they are our monsters." The comms crackled again. "Exarch," Admiral Vance said, wiping a smear of blood from his nose. The immediate threat is neutralized, however, we need to talk. We didn't just come here to smash bugs. We intercepted the transmission signals from the Void Hunters before we vaporized them. They weren't attacking you, they were fleeing. The atmosphere in the chamber shifted instantly from relief back to tension. Fleeing? Thulren asked. Fleeing from what? That's what we're here to find out, Vance replied. We're beaming down. I suggest you clear the floor. My security detail is heavy. The transport that descended from the Indomitable was as ugly and efficient as the mothership. It landed in the plaza outside the Synod Hall, cracking the ancient paving stones with its landing struts. When the ramp lowered, the airlock cycled with a hiss of steam, and the humans emerged. There were 6 of them, led by Vance. They wore armor that looked like it had been scavenged from tanks, covered in scratches and scorch marks. They carried weapons that were clearly kinetic, projectile throwers that relied on chemical explosions to propel metal slugs. To the energy weapon-wielding species of the Synod, these weapons seemed primitive, barbaric. But after seeing what the Indomitable could do, no one mistook primitive for weak. They marched into the grand chamber, the heavy thud of their boots echoing on the crystal floor. The alien guards, tall, slender warriors with plasma pikes, stepped back instinctively, their pheromones reeking of submission. The humans moved with a density that was palpable. They came from a world of crushing gravity, of erratic weather, of constant biological warfare on a microscopic scale. Even their walk was aggressive, a controlled fall forward. Vance stopped before the dais of light. He looked up at Thulren, who towered over him, yet the Exarch felt remarkably small. "Admiral," Thulren greeted, bowing his head slightly, a gesture of respect he had never offered an outsider. "You have saved our civilization. The Xanad Dominion is in your debt. We possess vast reserves of refined ore, biotechnology, and star charts. Name your price." Vance removed his helmet, clipping it to his belt. He took a breath of the filtered air, grimacing slightly at the taste. "We don't want your ore, Exarch. We have plenty of rocks, and your tech is delicate, useful but delicate." He looked around the chamber, his gaze landing on Kalen. He nodded to the small avian. "Good call on the signal, kid. You got guts. Stupid but gutsy." "Admiral," the aquatic delegate interjected, "you spoke of the enemy fleeing. Explain. What could frighten the Void Hunters?" Vance tapped a control on his wrist gauntlet, and a holographic projector built into his suit sprang to life. It cast a harsh, wireframe image into the air, overriding the Synod's elegant displays. It showed the galaxy, but with a massive red section pulsing in the unexplored western spiral. "We call it the Silence," Vance said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming serious, philosophical. "Humanity has been listening to the dark for a long time. We are a paranoid species, Exarch. We assume everything wants to kill us because on our homeworld everything did. So we listen, we watch. And 10 cycles ago we noticed that stars were going out in the west, not dying naturally, being snuffed out like candles." He gestured to the red zone. "The Void Hunters are scavengers. They don't fight real wars, they pick off the weak. They moved into your sector because their hunting grounds were destroyed. Something is moving in the deep dark, something that eats energy signatures. It's attracted to high-tech civilizations. The brighter you shine, the faster it comes." A cold wind seemed to sweep through the chamber. "And you," Thulren whispered, "you came here knowing this." "We came here because of this," Vance corrected. "See, you folks, you build walls, you hide behind shields, you cultivate art and philosophy, and you hope the universe is kind. It isn't. The universe is cold and indifferent, but we," he tapped his chest plate, "we aren't kind, we are stubborn. We saw the lights going out, and we decided we didn't like the dark. We decided to light a fire." "The Indomitable," Kalen realized aloud, stepping forward. "The radiation, the gravity drive, it's not just an engine, it's a lure." Vance smiled, a predatory showing of teeth that was somehow reassuring. "Smart bird, exactly. Our ship is the brightest, loudest, most obnoxious thing in this sector. We burn dirty. We scream into the radio spectrum. We warp gravity just by parking. We are ringing the dinner bell." Horror dawned on the assembly. "You are bait," Thulren gasped. "You came here to draw this silence to you, to us." "To us," Vance corrected. "Not you, we're going to intercept it, but we needed a staging ground. We needed to know if there was anyone worth saving out here. If you were just another empire of conquerors, we might have let the Silence have you. But this one," he pointed at Kalen. "He begged for help, not for himself, but for his people. He was willing to die for it. That told us you have something worth fighting for, empathy. It's a rare commodity in the galaxy." Vance paced the floor, his heavy boots clanking. "The Silence is coming. It'll be here in 3 days. The Void Hunters were just the rats running off the ship before it sinks. But this time, the ship isn't going to sink. We brought more than just the Indomitable. You said you came alone, the aquatic delegate accused. I said I brought one ship, Vance said. I didn't say what was inside it. He pressed another button. The display zoomed in on the Indomitable in orbit. The massive cargo bay doors on the underside of the human vessel were opening. From the belly of the beast, thousands of small, silver spheres were dropping into the orbital grid. They weren't ships, they were mines. Automated, antimatter-tipped, sensor-linked mines, millions of tons of ordnance. We are turning this system into a fortress, Vance declared. We are going to mine the perimeter. We are going to seed the gas giant with fusion exciters to turn it into a temporary star. We are going to make this system so bright and so dangerous that the silence chokes on it. Thulren looked at the human, really looked at him, and saw the deep, ancient weariness hidden behind the aggression. He realized then that humanity was not a young race, as the records suggested. They were an old soul in a young body. They had seen the abyss, and instead of blinking, they had built weapons to shoot it. Why? Thulren asked softly. Why do this for strangers? You call yourself Deathworlders. You claim to be creatures of survival. Risking extinction for a species you just met is not survival. It is altruism. It is illogical. Vance stopped pacing. He looked up at the vaulted ceiling at the ancient crystals. On Earth, he said quietly, we have a saying. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. We almost destroyed ourselves a dozen times. We nuked our own cities. We poisoned our air. We fought wars over dirt and God and oil. We learned the hard way that peace isn't the default state of nature. Peace is something you build, and sometimes peace is something you have to kill for. He turned back to the Exarch. We don't fight because we hate you or because we like war. We fight because we are the only ones crazy enough to stand in the mud and hold the line. You call us Deathworlders? Fine. We accept the title, but understand what it means. It means we own death. We decide when it happens. And today we decided, not here, not you. The room was silent for a long time. Then slowly, High Exarch Thulren descended from the dais of light. He moved with a grace that belied his bulk, stepping down until he stood eye to level with the human admiral. He extended a lower hand, a gesture of supreme trust, exposing the soft, unarmored palm. Then command us, High Admiral, Thulren said. The Xanad Dominion is yours to direct. Our fleets are broken, but our spirit is intact. Tell us how to help you hold the dark. Vance gripped the alien hand. The contrast was stark, the rough pink skin of the primate against the smooth, gray chitin of the insectoid. Evacuate the civilians to the deep bunkers, Vance ordered, slipping instantly back into command mode. Give me your engineers. I need to rig your orbital platforms to channel excess power to the Indomitable. We're going to overcharge the singularity drive. When the silence arrives, we're going to hit it with a gravity wave that will ring the bell of the universe. And if it fails? Kalen asked, stepping into the circle. Vance grinned, and it was the grin of a wolf at the end of winter. If it fails, kid, then we die standing up, which is a hell of a lot better than dying on our knees. The next 3 days were a blur of frenetic activity. The culture clash was immediate and jarring, yet surprisingly effective. The Xanad were meticulous, bureaucratic, and precise. The humans were chaotic, intuitive, and reckless. Xanad engineers wept openly when they saw how human mechanics bypassed safety regulators with duct tape and conductive paste. But they cheered when those same bypasses increased generator output by 300%. The humans, in turn, marveled at the Xanad crystal technology, realizing that the aliens had achieved efficiency through harmony that humans had tried to force through combustion. It was a marriage of sledgehammer and scalpel. The Indomitable sat in orbit, a dark spider in a web of silver mines, fed by tethers of energy streaming up from the planet below. The atmosphere on the ground changed. The fear evaporated, replaced by a grim determination. The presence of the Deathworlders had an intoxicating effect. If these small, soft creatures could stare into the face of a cosmic horror and crack jokes, surely the Xanad could hold a wrench. When the silence arrived, it did not come with a bang. It came with a shadow. The stars simply vanished. One by one, the constellations in the west blinked out, obscured by a cloud of non-matter that absorbed all wavelengths of light. The sensors on the Indomitable screamed. The entity was not a fleet. It was a biological construct the size of a solar system, a sprawling, amorphous mass of shadow and hunger. It was an apex predator on a galactic scale, a thing that fed on the energy of civilizations. Target confirmed, Vance said on the bridge. The lights were dimmed to combat crimson. It's massive, larger than projected. It's blocking out the nebula. It is beautiful, Kalen whispered from the comms station he had been assigned to. "In a terrible way, it is the end of all things." "Not today," Vance muttered. "All units initiate Protocol Sunrise." The trap was sprung. The gas giant, seeded with fusion exciters, ignited. It didn't just glow, it flared into a temporary second sun, blindingly bright, pouring a tsunami of ultraviolet and X-ray radiation into the void. The silence recoiled. It was a creature of the dark, and the sudden light burned it. It shrieked, a psychic scream that was felt by every telepathic species in the system. It lashed out, sending tendrils of shadow toward the planet. "Shields up," Vance roared. "Brace for impact." The Indomitable interposed itself between the planet and the tendrils. The gravity drive spun up to 150% capacity. The ship became a singularity. The shadow tendrils, capable of stripping the atmosphere from a world, were caught in the gravity well. They twisted, stretched, and snapped. The human ship groaned, the metals screaming under the stress, bulkheads buckling, sparks showering the bridge. "Hull integrity at 20%, someone yelled. "We're losing containment on the port nacelle." "Hold it together," Vance ordered. "Wait for it to commit. Wait until it tries to swallow us." The silence, enraged by the resistance, focused its entire mass on the Indomitable. It surged forward, a tidal wave of nothingness, wrapping around the human ship, intending to crush it to snuff out the annoying spark. "Now," Vance shouted, "drop the hammer." The Indomitable did not fire a weapon. It ejected its core. The Singularity Containment Unit, the heart of the ship, the device that held a captured black hole in check, was jettisoned directly into the center of the shadow entity. At the same moment, the thousands of antimatter mines detonated in a synchronized implosion around the core. The result was a physics violation of the highest order. The antimatter explosion compromised the event horizon of the micro-black hole. For a nanosecond, a white hole existed, a point of infinite outward pressure. The energy released was equivalent to the birth of a small galaxy. The silence didn't just die, it was unmade. The blast wave shredded its molecular cohesion. The shadow boiled away, revealing nothing but empty space and drifting atoms. The shockwave hit the Indomitable, sending it tumbling end over end into the lower atmosphere of the planet. On the ground, Thulren watched the sky turn white, then gold, then blue. The stars returned. The shadow was gone. A cheer went up from the capital city, a sound so loud it vibrated the crystal spires. But Thulren did not cheer. He watched the falling streak of fire that was the human ship. "Rescue teams," he bellowed into the comms. "Scramble every vessel, catch them." It took the Xanid 3 hours to extinguish the fires on the hull of the Indomitable where it had crash-landed in the Crimson Deserts outside the capital. The ship was a wreck, a twisted skeleton of metal, but the core hull was intact. Thulren and Kalen were the first to reach the airlock. They expected to find bodies. They expected to find the cost of their survival. The airlock hissed open, jamming halfway, requiring a Xanid warrior to pry it apart. Smoke billowed out. And then, coughing, Vance emerged. He was limping, his armor was fused on one side, and his face was covered in soot, but he was alive. Behind H. The crew stumbled out, battered, broken, but breathing. Vance looked at Thulren, blinked his eyes to clear the dust, and spat on the ground. "That," the human rasped, leaning heavily against the doorframe, "was a little closer than the simulations predicted." Kalen rushed forward, disregarding protocol, and embraced the human's leg, the only part he could reach. "You lived," the avian sobbed. "You lived." Vance patted the alien's head awkwardly. "Hard to kill a human, kid. We're too stubborn." Thulren stepped forward, his 4 arms trembling. "Admiral, you have destroyed the silence. You have saved the sector, the debt. It is immeasurable." Vance shook his head, wincing as he shifted his weight. "No debt, Exarch. We didn't do it for you. We did it because the silence was eating the stars, and we like the stars. They guide us home." He looked up at the night sky, where the constellations were visible again, bright and steady. "Besides," Vance added, a gleam of cunning returning to his eyes, "we didn't kill it, we just broke its teeth. There are more of them out there, and now that we know they can bleed." He let the sentence hang. "Now that you know they can bleed," Thulren prompted, fearful of the answer. Vance grinned, and it was the grin of a species that had climbed out of the mud, fought the dinosaurs, fought the ice ages, fought themselves, and won. "Now we go hunting." The revelation hung in the air, heavy and profound. The humans were not just guardians, they were the antibodies of the galaxy. They were the white blood cells in a universe infected with entropy. They sought out the danger. They craved the conflict, not for the sake of violence, but for the sake of existence itself. In the weeks that followed, the alliance was formalized. It was not a subjugation. The Xanad provided the logistics, the resources, the calm stability. The humans provided the steel, the fire, and the impossible courage. The foreigner who begged for help had not summoned a monster. He had summoned a knight, clad in armor of depleted uranium and wielding a sword of gravity. Kalen eventually wrote a memoir of the event, which became required reading in the Synod archives. The final passage of the text did not celebrate the victory, nor did it dwell on the fear. It was a reflection on the nature of the Deathworlders. "We looked into the dark and saw monsters," Kalen wrote. "We were afraid, for we are children of the light, and we believe that safety lies in stillness. But the humans taught us a different truth. They taught us that the dark is not empty. It is filled with things that hunger. And the only way to survive the dark is not to hide from it, but to become something the dark fears. The humans are dangerous. Their ships are abominations of physics. Their minds are jagged with trauma. But when the sky tears open and the end comes, do not pray to the silent gods. Send a signal to the dead zone. Call the monsters, for they are the only ones who will answer with fire." Back on the bridge of the repaired Indomitable, now sporting patches of gleaming Xanad crystal hull plating alongside the scarred human steel, Admiral Vance watched the repairs. He received a datapad from his XO. "Signal from Earth Command, sir," the XO said. "They picked up the energy spike from the White Hole event. They want to know status." Vance took the pad. "Send them a standard update," he said. "Target neutralized, local allies secured, resupplying for deep-range patrol." "And the anomaly, sir, the silence." Vance looked out the viewport at the stars. "Tell them it's a target-rich environment out here, and tell them to send more ships, the locals." He glanced at a Xanad repair crew working diligently alongside human welders on the hull. "The locals are friendly, and they're fast learners." The Indomitable fired its maneuvering thrusters, turning its prow away from the planet, back toward the deep, uncharted dark of the western spiral. The engine flared, a blue-white star of defiance. The Deathworlders were on the move again, patrolling the boundaries of existence, ensuring that while the universe might be cold, dark, and indifferent, it would never, ever be silent.